What happens when the strongest piece of evidence becomes the most fiercely contested? For generations, forensic science has been viewed as the closest thing our justice system has to certainty. Fingerprints, DNA, ballistics, evidence that seems immune to opinion. But every piece of evidence tells only part of a story. It must be collected, preserved, interpreted, and ultimately presented to a jury. When any part of that process is questioned, certainty begins to give way to doubt. Today, we're examining the ongoing prosecution surrounding the killing of Charlie Kirk, a case that has drawn intense public attention as prosecutors and defense attorneys present sharply different interpretations of the evidence. This is not a story about assumptions. It's a story about what is known, what is alleged, and what remains unanswered. The events began at a public rally where Charlie Kirk was fatally shot. Emergency responders rushed to the scene while law enforcement secured the area and launched a homicide investigation. Investigators documented physical evidence, interviewed witnesses, and worked to reconstruct exactly what happened. Within a relatively short time, Tyler Robinson became the primary suspect. Authorities executed search warrants, collected forensic evidence, and later announced criminal charges. Since then, the case has moved into the judicial system. Recent preliminary hearings have provided the public with its first detailed look at portions of the prosecution's evidence and the defense's response. It's important to remember that a preliminary hearing is not a trial. The court is not deciding guilt or innocence. Instead, the judge determines whether prosecutors have presented enough evidence for the case to proceed. Everything discussed during these hearings remains subject to challenge as the legal process continues. According to prosecutors, investigators uncovered several pieces of evidence that they believe connect Robinson to the shooting. Among the evidence discussed during the hearings were a towel and a rifle collected during the investigation. Prosecutors argue that these items are significant to their case. The state also introduced testimony from witnesses whose statements they contend help establish Robinson's actions before and after the shooting. One witness who received considerable attention was Lance Twiggs, identified in court testimony as Robinson's former roommate. According to prosecutors, Twiggs described conversations and events following the shooting that they believe support their overall theory of the case. The prosecution also presented expert testimony regarding forensic analysis, including DNA testing performed on evidence recovered during the investigation. They argue that these scientific findings strengthen the connection between the suspect and the physical evidence. Taken together, prosecutors maintain that the combination of forensic evidence, witness testimony, and investigative findings establishes probable cause for the case to move forward. But probable cause is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And that distinction lies at the heart of the defense's response. Defense attorneys have challenged several aspects of the state's presentation. Their arguments focus not only on the conclusions reached by investigators, but also on the methods used to collect and interpret the evidence. The defense has questioned whether contamination or other issues could have affected the reliability of certain forensic findings. They have also challenged the interpretation of witness testimony, urging the court to carefully consider context, consistency, and credibility. Rather than accepting the prosecution's interpretation of the evidence, defense attorneys argue that alternative explanations deserve careful consideration. This reflects one of the most fundamental principles of criminal justice. The burden of proof belongs entirely to the prosecution. The defense is not required to prove innocence. Its role is to challenge whether the state's evidence is reliable enough to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. As the hearings continue, these competing interpretations are expected to receive even closer scrutiny. Despite everything presented so far, many questions remain unanswered. How will additional forensic experts evaluate the evidence? Will future witnesses reinforce or contradict earlier testimony? Could new evidence emerge before the trial? At this stage, no one knows. Preliminary hearings are designed to determine whether a case should move forward, not to deliver a final verdict. That responsibility ultimately belongs to a jury after hearing all admissible evidence presented during the trial. Until then, many aspects of this investigation remain open to examination. The pursuit of justice is rarely straightforward. Evidence can illuminate, but it can also be disputed. Witnesses can strengthen a case or raise entirely new questions. In every criminal investigation, facts are gathered one piece at a time. Only when those pieces are tested in court can the full picture begin to emerge. As this case continues through the justice system, the central question remains the same. Will the evidence ultimately withstand the scrutiny of trial? Or will reasonable doubt reshape the narrative once again? We'll continue following the proceedings as new verified information becomes available, because every verdict should rest on evidence that has been thoroughly tested, not merely assumed. If you found this investigation informative, consider subscribing to more evidence-based documentaries exploring some of the world's most compelling criminal cases. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and always follow the evidence, because every case leaves a shadow. Every mystery deserves a voice. I'm your host, and this is Shadow Case Files.